The Vow That Broke a Man. Subscribe. Don't miss out on more stories that will touch your heart. Leave a like and a comment below about what you think of this story. And don't forget to share it with someone who loves a good tale of love and redemption. He abandoned the woman he loved for a life of luxury, but fate would bring him back to face the life he left behind. ×3. Paige Rivers wasn't a woman of grand dreams, but of small, sincere desires. At 26, she lived a simple life as a first-grade teacher at a public school in Portland, Oregon. Her routine was marked by the smell of chalk, the sound of children's voices, and the warmth of the long American afternoons. She lived with her widowed mother, and between schoolwork and household chores, she had little time for herself. Her past romances had been as brief as letters forgotten in a drawer. On a suffocating morning in March, she accepted an unexpected invitation from a coworker to attend a charity event organized by a corporate foundation. She didn't know what to expect, only that there would be music, children, and maybe some good food. Paige put on her best dress, a simple light blue one, and pinned her hair to the side with a flower a student had given her the day before. It was there, in the shade of a flowering dogwood tree, that her eyes met Arthur Kingston's. He was the heir to the Kingston Industries empire, one of the most powerful financial conglomerates in the country. He was only there out of obligation, but something about this young woman with the serene smile made him stop. She didn't know who he was, and for some reason, that fascinated him. Paige treated him like any other volunteer, asking him to help her carry boxes of toys. Arthur obeyed without a word, as if he were just one of the crowd, and he liked the feeling. During lunch, they sat together by chance. They talked about the children, about classic books, about the value of education. Not a single word about wealth, status, or last names. Just two souls meeting in silence. In the following days, Arthur couldn't stop thinking about her. Accustomed to women who wanted him for his name, not for his heart, he felt disarmed. He wanted to know more. He found out where she taught, and, without her knowing, began to fund improvements for the school. He had the walls painted and new materials bought, but he never signed anything. It was a silent gift. The reunion happened 2 weeks later, at another foundation event. This time, he made sure to ask her out for coffee. Paige hesitated. She knew this man was no ordinary man. His gaze carried weight, his cologne was too expensive, but something inside her said, "Why not?" The coffee turned into long conversations in the park, and then into discreet dinners, always far from the press and the eyes of his world. They were two opposite worlds that met in the darkness. Paige, with her simple soul, showed Arthur what it was like to walk hand in hand down streets without private security. Arthur, for his part, showed her a side of life she had never known, but always with respect. He listened to her like no one else, and she, though with reservations, began to allow herself to dream. But there was a secret. Arthur never told Paige about the weight of his family. His father, Mr. Octavius Kingston, was a rigid, controlling man who would never accept a relationship with anyone outside the elite. And his mother, though sweeter, carried the same silent pride. Arthur tried to live a double life, hiding what he felt for Paige from everyone, as if she were a forbidden treasure. One night, as they walked along the shore of a quiet lake, he took her hands and said in a low voice, "If this were easier, I would introduce you to the world without fear." Paige smiled, but her heart sank. She already knew. He belonged to another universe, one where women like her had no place. Still, she gave herself to him. Not out of naivete, but because for the first time she felt that this love, though improbable, was real. There was something bittersweet in the way Paige and Arthur lived that love. Every encounter was a spark stolen from the real world, an instant suspended in time that seemed to belong to no one but them. They met in secluded cafes, discreet inns, and sometimes in his car, parked in quiet alleys, where they allowed themselves to be just two lovers and not representatives of such different worlds. Paige never asked him to introduce her. She knew the reality, or so she thought. Arthur, for his part, avoided the topic, like someone who fears a single wrong word might topple the sandcastle they had built with such care. And deep down, he was also lost, torn between the weight of the Kingston name and the gentle warmth of Paige's hands, that made him feel more like a man than any number in his bank account. Weeks turned into months. Arthur spent most of his time pretending to be on business trips, when in reality, he was doing everything he could to spend a few hours by her side. And Paige, she lived between the joy of the children at school and the moments stolen with him, dreaming of a what if she never dared to say out loud. It was during one of those meetings that Arthur brought her a small wooden box with a dried flower inside. "It's from the first time I saw you," he said. Paige cried, and he held her tight. That day, lying under a thin blanket in a cabin on the outskirts of the city, he whispered to her, "I swear, I will never leave you, but a secret love has a price." Paige began to notice his increasingly frequent absences. Arthur, pressured by the company and his parents, began to show up with dark circles under his eyes and a more reserved demeanor. He said everything was fine, but he avoided talking about the future. When Paige timidly brought up the idea of one day meeting his family, he would look away. Despite that, their moments together were intense, almost sacred. One rainy Sunday, as they danced in the middle of her living room to an old song, Arthur stopped in the middle of the music and said, "If my life were just my own, you'd be my wife right now." Paige smiled, but held back tears, because she knew his life would never be his own. It was also at this time that she started recording these moments in a small journal hidden in her drawer, as if she feared that it was all just a dream about to fade away. She wrote about the way he laughed, the smell of his shirt, the way he stroked her hair without saying a word. The relationship, though hidden, was too real. And that was what hurt them most. Arthur's world was beginning to crumble. His mother warned him about potential marriages of convenience, and his father pressured him to take on greater responsibilities in the company. And he, with his heart trapped between two realities, didn't know how to keep his balance. Sometimes he thought about running away, about leaving it all behind. But the fear, that fear of disappointing, of losing the empire, of facing his father, paralyzed him. Paige felt it. She saw his love, but she also felt that invisible wall that held him back. And in silence, she prayed every night that love would be stronger than fear. The missed period came like an uncomfortable whisper. Paige, always so regular, began counting the days with the precision of an anxious clock. Every morning she looked at the calendar, trying to convince herself that it was just stress, maybe a temporary hormonal change. But deep down, a maternal intuition, though still silent, was already beginning to awaken. In the third week, unable to sleep well, she bought a pharmacy test and hid it in the bottom of her purse. She waited for her mother to leave for church, locked herself in the bathroom, and with trembling hands took the test. The result appeared too quickly, as if fate had just been waiting for her to look. 2 lines, 2 certainties, a life. She sat on the cold floor, hugging her knees. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stayed there in silence, trying to understand how her world, and his, would change from that moment on. And yet, even with the fear, her first thought was pure. It's my baby. It's ours. In the following days, Paige wavered between euphoria and fear. Sometimes she would gently stroke her belly, imagining what it would be like to have someone with Arthur's smile. Other times, panic would consume her. What if he doesn't want it? What if he denies it? What if he abandons me? But the love she felt for him spoke louder. She remembered all the sweet words, the whispered promises, the dried flower carefully saved. "I swear I will never leave you," kept resonating in her mind like a prayer, and that was what gave her courage. She called him and arranged to meet in a special place, a hidden park in the city's historic center, where they had first kissed. Arthur arrived with a tired face, his phone ringing insistently, but he turned it off as soon as he saw her. He sat down beside her, kissed her forehead, and asked, "Why are you so quiet, my love?" Paige squeezed his hand tightly, and with a choked voice simply said, "I'm pregnant, Arthur." The silence that followed was the longest of her life. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her as if the world had stopped. His gaze was not one of joy. It was one of panic. Paige tried to smile, tried to explain that everything would be okay, that they could raise it together, that their love was strong. But Arthur got up abruptly, walked a few steps away with his back to her, and said in a low voice, "This can't be happening." Paige's heart sank. He didn't hug her, he didn't cry, he just stood there, motionless, as if he had been betrayed by a cruel fate. And in that instant, she understood. The news that should have brought them together was about to tear them apart. Arthur paced back and forth in the park, his hands on his head and his face tense. Paige remained seated, watching him with tear-filled eyes, waiting for any gesture of tenderness. A hug, everything's going to be okay. Anything to tell her that he was still the man who had promised never to leave her. But what she heard was the complete opposite. "This isn't my problem, Paige." The words came out dry, as if the man in front of her were a stranger. Paige blinked, stunned, not understanding. She tried to laugh, thinking maybe it was a nervous reaction. "What do you mean it's not your problem, Arthur? It's your son or daughter." But he looked away. He didn't have the courage to look her in the eyes. The fear of scandal, of Mr. Octavius's reaction, of the press, of losing his perfect image. It all weighed on Arthur. His rational mind screamed louder than his heart, and at that crossroads, he chose the easiest path, the most cowardly one. "You knew what you were getting into," he added. It was like a slap. Paige felt her soul leave her body for a second. The man who had so often sworn eternal love now spit out phrases that tasted like poison. She got up slowly, her body trembling. She looked at him one last time, searching his face for any trace of the Arthur she had known. But all she saw was a frightened boy, hiding behind the Kingston name. "I love you, Arthur, but if you leave now, don't ever come back." He didn't reply. He turned and walked away. He didn't even look back. That night, Paige cried until she had no more tears. She cried in her mother's lap, who hadn't known anything until then. She cried for the dreams that had been shattered, for the promises that had turned to dust, and for a love that now only hurt. But in the midst of that silent grief, she placed a hand on her belly and said in a low voice, "Don't worry, my love. Mommy is with you." The days that followed were a blur. Arthur didn't call. He didn't text. He disappeared as if he had never existed. And Paige, with the dignity of a strong woman, swallowed the shame and decided to move forward. Not for him, but for the tiny lives that were now growing inside her. Deep down, she still believed that maybe, just maybe, he would change. That he would show up with flowers, full of regret. But that never happened. and the emptiness of his absence became more present than any memory. Time passed like a silent gale. Paige carried the weight of the pregnancy not only in her body, but in her soul. Every doctor's appointment was made alone. Every curious glance from a neighbor, every solitary morning was a scar she would learn to transform into a medal. She didn't know there would be 3. Ultrasounds at the public clinic, sometimes imprecise, hadn't revealed the surprise. The doctor only said the baby was strong, that its heart was beating fast. But Paige felt there was something different, a synchronized kind of movement, as if several hearts were dancing to the same beat inside her. It was on a rainy morning in a modest Portland hospital when the pains began. Paige arrived alone, feeling intense contractions. The nurse, upon examining her, her eyes wide. "You're ready to meet your 3 daughters." Paige almost fainted. 3? The news hit her like lightning. There was no time to process it, only to breathe and push. The delivery was long and complicated. The doctor kept telling her she had to be strong, that the girls were in a hurry to be born. But in the midst of the pain, Paige held on to a single thought. "You are all I have now." When she heard the first cry, Paige was already crying. When the second came, she smiled through her tears. And when she heard the third, she let out a sigh that seemed to carry all the pain and all the hope in the world. 3 girls, 3 lives, 3 reasons to start over. The medical team applauded her. There was something sacred about that birth, as if life, in its generosity, had given her back in triple what destiny had taken away. Paige took her daughter's tiny hands, one on each side, and whispered, "We'll never be alone again, my loves. You are my miracle." In the following days, the triplets became little celebrities among the nurses. They were identical, like perfect copies of the same dream. Paige named them with care and love. Violet, the first to cry. Rose, who was born in silence, but with her eyes wide open. And Lily, who grabbed her finger before she even opened her eyes. There was no luxurious bassinet, no nannies, no silk layette, but there were arms. There was milk. There were lullabies, whispered with love. Paige didn't sleep, but she didn't complain either. The exhaustion was defeated by the gaze of her girls, by the feeling of having been chosen by God for something bigger. And every time one of them smiled in the makeshift crib, Paige thought, "You missed this, Arthur. You missed the best part of us." With 3 babies in her arms and a heart still in pieces, Paige made the most difficult and courageous decision of her life: to leave Portland. The city, once filled with good memories, now only reminded her of broken promises and looks of pity. She needed to breathe a different air. She needed to start over, far from Arthur's ghost. That's how, with the little she had, and the help of a distant aunt, she moved to a small town in Oregon. It was a modest house, with faded paint and old furniture, but with a backyard that let the sun in the mornings, and that was enough. Paige started from scratch again. She sewed at night for a uniform store, while during the day she took care of her daughters with the dedication of a woman who had lost everything, but still chose to love without reservation. Every cry was met with tenderness. Every step her daughters took was a personal victory. There were no luxuries, but there was plenty of affection. The neighbors, upon hearing her story, became a network of support. Mrs. Adams, on the right, would make her soup on cold days. Martha, on the left, taught her tricks to soothe colic with basil leaves. And so, between changing diapers and children's laughter, Paige began to find her own life. Little by little, each of them revealed their personality. Violet was impulsive and brave. Rose was sweet and observant. Lily was charming and mischievous. Together, they filled the house with life and Paige's soul with purpose. Seeing them run around the yard, she would think, maybe I lost one man. But I gained a universe. On silent nights, after they were all asleep, Paige still wrote in her journal. The first steps, the made-up words, the fears she tried to hide. Sometimes, she would confess feeling nostalgic for him, but not for the man who abandoned her. Nostalgia for the man he could have been as a father. The town, with its blue sky and the smell of fresh laundry in the air, was turning into a home. Paige found a steady job as a teaching assistant at a local daycare. She brought her daughters with her, and the kids in the class adored them. They called them the 3 stars, and despite all the difficulties, the tight budget, the hand-me-down clothes, the reused toys, there was a peace there that Portland had never given her. Because finally, no one demanded anything from her. She could simply be a mother, a woman, a warrior. Paige learned to smile again, not because she had forgotten, but because love, even when it cuts deep, also knows how to stitch with tenderness. Time, though it didn't heal all the wounds, taught Paige to live with them. The first years in the new town were a survival marathon. The triplets grew fast, full of energy and questions, while the money seemed to shrink every week. Paige learned to make a little rice go a long way, to patch shoes, to fix toys with duct tape. Creativity and faith became her greatest allies. The nights were short. Many times she would sew late, with one of the girls in her arms and another crying in the makeshift crib. When she finally managed to lie down, she slept with one eye open, because a single mother never truly sleeps in peace. Dark circles became a part of her face, but she still smiled. In the mornings, even when she barely had money for bread, the absence of a father was felt in the small details, in the innocent questions about daddy, in the school parties where everyone arrived as a couple. Paige would invent stories. She would say he was traveling a lot, that he was a world adventurer. Not out of fear of the truth, but because she still didn't know how to explain it without breaking something inside them. She had to be a man strong enough to cover the overdue bills, the donated clothes, and the cold nights. Paige was moved to see the 3 of them sleeping together, sharing the same blanket, whispering secrets that only sisters understand. That was wealth, the kind that isn't measured in numbers. Sometimes, on the most difficult days, she would allow herself to cry in the bathroom, not for him, but for her strength. She would think, am I doing this right? Can I handle all this? But a simple "I love you, Mommy" from one of the girls was enough to remind her that yes, she could. She rejected help with pride, not out of vanity, but because she felt that if she allowed herself to depend on someone, she might crumble, and Paige couldn't fall. She had 3 hearts depending on her. She became respected, always willing, always professional, always with a smile, even on the days when her inner world was nothing but ruins. Other mothers admired her, students adored her, but no one imagined the hurricane she faced when the school bell rang. Violet, Rose, and Lily, now almost 4 years old, were beginning to show their distinct personalities. Violet had a fire in her eyes, even when she was trying to be good. She was strong and brave, and her stubborn character reminded Paige of someone she preferred not to mention. Her eyes shone with a determination rare in a 5-year-old. Rose, on the other hand, was quiet, sensitive, and deeply observant. She liked to sit by the window and ask questions about the world, like, why are some kids sad when they don't have a mommy? Paige would hug her tightly, feeling the weight of that innocence laden with empathy. Lily, the youngest by a few minutes, was a whirlwind of charm. She talked to everyone, made funny faces, imitated teachers, and brought laughter to even the grumpiest neighbors. She had a natural gift for making everyone around her feel a little lighter, as if life was just too hard to take so seriously. At the market, everyone knew the three of them. Vendors would save them fruit, neighbors would leave her with homemade candies, and even the mailman would smile at the drawings they left in the mailbox. They were, without knowing it, little ambassadors of joy in that simple neighborhood. Paige knew they didn't have fancy toys, trips, or designer clothes, but she also knew that her daughters were growing up with something much more valuable: love, empathy, and dignity. The sisters had a secret code of communication, a kind of language of their own, made up of glances, whistles, and small gestures. Once at school, when Violet fell and scraped her knee, Rose and Lily ran to her, one on each side, as if one could feel the other's pain. During town festivals, the girls were always invited to go on stage for children's performances. They would sing, dance, and captivate with the same naturalness with which they would call their mother our queen when Paige finished braiding their hair. And even on the most difficult days, when the refrigerator was empty, a group hug, a drawing full of hearts, or an unexpected phrase like, "You're the best mommy in the whole wide world," was more effective than any medicine. Paige would often look at them and wonder, how could you have come from the same man who turned his back on me? But she would immediately correct the thought. You came from me, and the love I had for a better man, a lonely man. Almost 5 years had passed since he abandoned Paige in that park in Portland. Since then, he had immersed himself fully in the family business, taking over the financial empire with a coldness that mirrored his father's. But something gnawed at him from within, a silent guilt, an absence that no victory could fill. A construction company with stalled projects in the state of Oregon was threatening to go bankrupt. The partners demanded his presence in person. Against his will, he had to get down from his office in the city and travel the forgotten roads that crossed the country's interior. It was a Monday afternoon when he arrived in the small town for a meeting with the Secretary of Public Works. As the meeting was postponed, he decided to walk through the town center, something he hadn't done in years. He wore dark sunglasses, an impeccable suit, but without a bodyguard. He just wanted to think, to breathe, to escape, perhaps, from himself. Walking through a small, tree-lined square, his eyes were drawn to a familiar sound, the laughter of some little girls. 3 little girls were playing in a fountain, laughing loudly, running barefoot on the grass. For an instant, Arthur smiled. That faint, almost forgotten smile he had before everything fell apart. But as he got a little closer, something inside him froze. The 3 girls were identical, so identical they looked like mirrors of one another. Light brown hair, almond-shaped eyes, and something impossible to deny. The same chiseled jawline he saw every day in the mirror. Arthur stopped, his heart pounding. It was like standing in front of a fragmented reflection, a strange sensation running down his spine. The girls laughed, shouting names to each other. "Violet, wait for me! Rose, be careful! Lily, come here!" Arthur, stunned, murmured those names under his breath. It was then that he saw her. A woman in the shade of a tree watched the girls with tenderness. She wore a simple dress and had her hair tied back. When she got up and turned her face, time stood still. Paige, she was there, with the same deep eyes, but with more mature, stronger features. And there she was, as a mother. Arthur took a step back, as if he had been punched in the stomach. The guilt buried for years under layers of rationality exploded like a broken dam. Those girls were his. He couldn't move. He stood there, hidden, watching everything he had lost, the life he could have had. Paige lifted one of the girls into her arms, kissed another on the forehead, and laughed with the third. It was a living painting of everything he had abandoned out of cowardice. Without the courage to show himself, Arthur returned to his hotel with a broken heart. For the first time in years, he couldn't sleep. He spent the night wide awake, staring at the hotel ceiling and listening to the voices of the daughters he never knew echoing inside him. The next day, the morning dawned grayer than usual. Arthur, still shaken by the sight of the girls, woke up without knowing for sure if what he had experienced had been a dream or a reality. But one thing was certain. Those 3 girls couldn't be a coincidence. They were him, in 3 small, sweet, and painfully absent versions from his life. Without thinking much, he got in the car and drove to the park. He needed to see them again. He needed to know. He needed something he still didn't know how to name, but that pulled him like an invisible thread, tugging at his chest. He arrived early and waited, sitting on a bench, disguised with a cap and dark glasses. And when he saw them arrive, the air seemed to disappear. Paige was holding hands with all 3. The scene was absurdly poetic. A single woman with 3 stars around her. The girls ran to play, and Paige, with that same serene air as always, sat under the same tree as the day before with a book in her hands. Nothing seemed to have changed in her, but at the same time, everything had. Arthur watched every movement, trying to absorb the details, like someone contemplating a painting about to be taken out of the gallery. The girls' laughter sounded like music. The way they protected each other, how they ran after the pigeons, how they always came back to their mother's side. He saw a complete family, and he understood that the only stranger there was him. Then it happened. One of the girls, Lily, stumbled and fell. Before Paige could get up, Arthur was already on his feet. Instinct was faster than fear. He ran to her, helped her up, and asked in a soft voice, "Are you okay, princess?" Lily looked at him for an instant and smiled, a smile identical to his. "Thank you, sir." Arthur froze. The girl ran back to her mother, who was now watching him in silence. Paige recognized him immediately. There was no scream, no surprise, no scene, just a dense silence, full of unspoken memories. She looked at him with firm eyes, not of astonishment, but of defiance, as if to say, "You no longer have the right to be here." He took a step forward, but his voice failed him. "Paige." She got up slowly, walked toward him with her head held high, and whispered coldly, "You don't have permission to speak to me." She turned and called the girls. In seconds, they walked away, like a sigh dissolving in the wind. Arthur remained there, feeling the weight of the past crushing him. The image of little Lily smiling at him, Paige's sharp gaze, the life he didn't live. It all swirled around him like a silent storm. For the first time, he deeply understood what he had lost. And in that park, where life gave him a second chance only to show him everything he had abandoned, Arthur understood that guilt was no longer just a feeling. It was a sentence. Paige knew this day would come, though she never knew how or when. When she saw Arthur in that park, helping Lily, her heart skipped a beat, not out of love, but out of a silent warning. He was there, in flesh, bone, and regret, but she was no longer the woman he had left behind. That night, she couldn't sleep. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she watched her daughters sleep, all curled up with each other like kittens. She thought about everything. The years of his absence, the letters she never wrote, the whys she kept silent. She felt anger, yes, but also a firm calm, the serenity of someone who had won alone. Arthur, for his part, could barely look at himself in the mirror. The encounter with Paige and the brief interaction with Lily devastated him. He saw in her eyes a woman who was hurt, but not weak, and that shook him. Because he had expected reproaches, maybe a demand for explanations, but all he received was the most powerful silence of his life. The next day, he went back to the park. He didn't almost know if he would have the courage to approach. He just wanted to see them one more time. And there they were, the girls running between the benches, Paige sitting under the tree, as always. But this time, she saw him first. She got up and walked toward him. It was the first time in 5 years that they were face to face. There were no people, no music, just the two of them, and a past hanging between them like a broken bridge. Arthur tried to speak, but he couldn't. He wanted to say everything at once. Forgive me. I was immature. I was a coward. I loved you, and I still love you. But nothing came out. Paige looked him in the eyes with a firmness that Arthur had never seen in her. She wasn't there to hear excuses. She didn't need explanations. Everything had already been said. In the years of silence, in the nights without a response, in the lonely deliveries, and in the mornings when her daughters asked for a father who never existed. Then, without a single word, she moved closer and looked at him intensely. In her eyes was everything: pain, unresolved love, exhaustion, pride, and what hurt him the most, disappointment. A disappointment that bled in silence like an internal wound. He wanted to cry. He wanted to kneel, but Paige didn't give him that opportunity. She touched his chest with 2 fingers and said in a low voice, "Look at them closely, because they don't owe you anything, and you don't owe them anything." She turned and went back to her daughters without looking back. Arthur stood motionless, like a statue sculpted in regret. He felt the weight of her words sink into his skin like icy fire. There was no forgiveness, no reproach, just the truth. A clean, naked, and brutal truth. And in that instant, he understood. She didn't need him to feel complete, but he needed them to feel human again. In the days that followed, Arthur became an invisible presence around the town. He didn't dare to knock on her door or approach his daughters, but he needed to see them. It was as if the simple act of watching them from a distance could ease the guilt that burned inside him. Disguised among tourists or sitting on park benches with a newspaper as a shield, Arthur became a spectator of a life that, out of cowardice, he had decided not to live. He saw Paige leaving early with the girls, always holding hands, always laughing about something simple. A bird in a tree, a song on the radio, a game between sisters. One night, he saw them having dinner at a small local restaurant. The table was modest, with rice, chicken, and juice, but the joy was abundant. The girls shared bites. Paige cut the food into smaller pieces, and they all laughed at the stories Lily made up. Arthur, across the street, felt a lump in his throat. In all his luxurious banquets with executives, he had never felt anything like it. Another day, passing by the school where Paige worked, he saw the triplets running in the yard, all with the same braids and simple uniforms. They were light, they were life, and he was just a man who was absent in their past. Paige was still strong, but he noticed the subtle wrinkles on her face, the tiredness in her shoulders, the lost looks when she thought no one was watching her. That hurt him more than any reproach, because she was not just a heroic mother. She was a wounded woman who never had a choice. Arthur began to examine his own emptiness. He remembered the days when he thought he had everything: wealth, status, freedom. And now he saw that all of that was dust compared to the warmth of a child, jumping into her lap and saying, "Mommy," with tenderness, with the innocent affection of a real family. A family he had rejected. He began to write letters he never sent, Journals filled with phrases like, "Forgive me, I was a scared boy," and "I could have been a good father if I had just tried." He kept everything in a folder hidden in his suitcase, as if, at least there, he could try to rebuild the pieces of his humanity. One rainy afternoon, he saw her covering her daughters with her own coat, running toward a shelter. None of them complained about the rain. They laughed as if the world belonged only to them. And there, Arthur understood. That was love. Not the one he had lived with her years ago, but the one she had built after him, alone and complete. That night, lying in a cheap hotel room with the sound of rain hitting the window, Arthur cried for the first time in years. It was no longer anger or despair. It was real pain, because he was finally waking up, and the world he once belonged to was no longer his. Arthur knew he couldn't just knock on Paige's door and demand a place in his daughters' lives. He knew he didn't have that right. But the desire to hear their voices, to get a smile from them, to be present, even for a few moments, grew inside him like a vital need. It was on a Saturday morning that the opportunity arose. The girls were at the park, alone with a woman who seemed to be a neighbor. Paige had stayed home with a fever, he overheard in a conversation. Arthur approached slowly, his heart in his throat. When Lily saw him, she let out an excited cry. "The man who helped me when I fell!" Violet and Rose surrounded him, curious. "What's your name?" they asked, as children do when they take a liking to someone. Arthur smiled, trying to contain his emotion. "My name is Andrew." A false name, out of fear, out of caution, or perhaps out of cowardice. The trio adopted him immediately. In less than 5 minutes, he was pushing them on the swing, listening to stories made up by Lily, receiving drawings made in the sand, and teaching Violet how to skip stones into the lake. It was as if their souls already knew each other, as if blood spoke before a name. The feeling was overwhelming. For the first time, Arthur felt like a father, even if it was a secret for a few borrowed hours from fate. In every laugh, in every "look what I can do," he saw himself multiplied, and also forgiven, even though he hadn't confessed anything yet. The next day, he returned to the park with a small bag of artisan candies and a children's book. The girls ran to him, calling him Uncle Andrew. He read them stories, improvised voices, and answered absurd questions about dinosaurs and stars. And when one of them rested her head on his shoulder, he felt something break inside him. It was love, pure and real, but the illusion was short-lived. Paige, leaving work early, decided to stop by the park to pick up the girls. And as she turned the corner, she saw him, Arthur, or Andrew, sitting on the ground with her 3 daughters around him, as if he were part of that world. Her blood boiled. Without hesitation, she walked toward him. Her gaze was hard and sharp. The girls ran to her, excited. "Mommy, Uncle Andrew told us stories." Paige smiled at them, but her eyes were fixed on him. And then, in a low and sharp tone, she said, "Don't you dare confuse them." Arthur got up, ashamed, trying to say something. But she interrupted him with a gesture. "Don't play with them the way you played with me. They are not a hobby." She took her daughter's hands and walked away, leaving him standing there, his eyes filled with tears and his heart crushed by the truth. From that moment on, Arthur understood that the path to them would not be easy. He would have to earn every step, every word, every drop of forgiveness. Not with grandiose gestures, but with his sincere presence. And even then, it might never be enough. Arthur spent days unable to look at his own reflection. The image of his daughters smiling at him, calling him Uncle Andrew, mixed with the look of disgust on Paige's face, haunted him like a shadow. He knew he had tried to redeem himself with small gestures, but he was still hiding the truth. And that, in itself, was still a form of cowardice. It was then that he decided to return to the city. He needed to talk to someone. He needed to pour out his soul. He sought out the only person he still trusted. His mother, Mrs. Teresa. An elegant woman of few words who always maintained her composure even in the face of Mr. Octavius's difficult temperament. She always watched him with firm eyes, but eyes full of tenderness. And when he showed up at her door, pale and broken, she knew immediately that something serious had happened. "Mom, I need to tell you something I've hidden for 5 years." She simply nodded and sat down. The silence of the house seemed to wait with her. Arthur told her everything. From the day Paige told him about the pregnancy to the moment he abandoned her in the park. He talked about his selfish choice to turn his back on her. About the years of silence, about their reunion in the town. He told her about the triplets, about how wonderful they are, about how life made them shine despite his absence. Mrs. Teresa listened without interrupting, but her eyes, once serene, began to harden. When he finished, she got up, crossed her arms, and said a phrase that hit him directly in the chest. "Your father taught you to be strong, Arthur, but not to be cruel." Arthur tried to justify himself, to say he was young, that he was under pressure, but she didn't want to hear excuses. True strength is in staying, in taking responsibility for the consequences. You left like a scared boy and left a woman alone with 3 lives in her arms. He, accustomed to running companies and silencing advice, felt small. His mother's voice was calm, but laden with a silent, deep disappointment, the worst kind. "And now, what do you plan to do?" she asked. "I don't know. I just want to make things right. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness, but I need to fight for them." Mrs. Teresa approached, touched his face with her firm hands. "Then fight with dignity, not with disguises or with lies. Tell them who you are, because if they forgive you, it will be because you deserved it." That night, Arthur didn't sleep, but for the first time, it wasn't because of remorse, but because of a decision. He would stop hiding. He would stop running. From now on, he would face the truth, no matter who it hurt. Arthur returned to the town with his heart pounding as if he had a broken clock inside his chest. Each step toward Paige's house weighed tons. He knew there were no words in the world that could erase what he had done, but he needed to try. No longer as Uncle Andrew, nor as a Kingston, but only as a remorseful man. Paige was hanging clothes on the line when he arrived. The afternoon sun cast delicate shadows on her brown skin, and for a second, Arthur wanted to freeze that moment. But she saw him, and her expression immediately hardened. There was no surprise, just a weariness. "I need to talk to you without masks, without nicknames," he said. Paige crossed her arms. "Then talk, but talk quickly." Arthur took a deep breath and began. He spoke like never before. He said he had abandoned her out of fear, out of weakness, out of cowardice. He confessed that he had hated himself for every one of those 5 years. He told her how he first saw his daughters and felt his world crumble. How he cried at the sight of them laughing. How he felt the ground disappear when he heard "Mommy" directed at him. The words came out in a torrent. And then, as if a dam had broken inside, he fell to his knees. He cried. For the first time in his adult life, he cried in front of someone. The tears ran down his face in silent sobs. "Forgive me, Paige. Please, I don't deserve anything, but I want to fight for what I abandoned." Paige watched him, her heart tight, her body tense. Seeing Arthur there, in pieces, gave her no pleasure. It hurt her. Because she had known that man before the world had hardened him, and a part of her still wanted to believe that he could change. But it wasn't that simple. "Arthur, those tears don't erase sleepless nights, or questions I could never answer for our daughters," she said in a firm voice. "You're crying now, but I cried for 5 years alone." He lowered his head, defeated. "I know, and that's why I'm not asking for a place. Just a chance to prove that I've changed, even if it's little by little, from a distance." Paige was silent for a time that seemed eternal. Then she took a step back. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you, Arthur, but if we're going to try, it has to be slowly. Very slowly." She went inside the house and closed the door, not with anger, but with care, leaving a crack. And Arthur, still on his knees, understood. This was not the end. It was a beginning. Painful, uncertain, but real. After Arthur's plea for forgiveness, Paige withdrew into herself. It was as if an old dam broken, flooding her heart with memories she had sworn to bury. In the following days, she felt absent even with her own daughters, as if their every gesture reminded her of him. And that was, at the same time, beautiful and painful. One night, after the girls were asleep, Paige went to the back of her closet. There, in a cardboard box, wrapped in a blue scarf, were the letters. Not the ones she received, but the ones she never had the courage to send. There were more than 30 of them, written with smudged ink and a raw heart. Letters that started with, "I hate you," and ended with, "Please come back." She read them one by one, with silent tears. It wasn't nostalgia for the man who left. It was grief for everything they could have lived. Every letter was a version of herself, trying to understand the abandonment, trying to be strong, trying to forgive before it was time. And now, with Arthur back, all those words took on a new weight. The next day, at breakfast, Rose asked, "Mommy, why hasn't Uncle Andrew come anymore?" Paige was silent. Violet added, "He was fun. He told great jokes." Lily, always more direct, said, "Didn't you like him, Mommy?" Paige took a deep breath. She knew she couldn't keep lying, but she also didn't want to reveal a truth that was too raw. So she sat on the floor with the 3 of them, pulled them close, and said tenderly, "Sometimes people make mistakes, big ones, and sometimes they try to fix them. That man isn't a stranger. He's a part of you." The girls looked at each other, not fully understanding, but with open hearts. "Is he our real daddy?" Violet whispered. Paige nodded, and her daughter's eyes widened like moons. There was no drama, no crying, just silence. A silence that said, "We want to understand." Later, alone in her room, Paige looked at herself in the mirror. She was no longer the young woman in love who believed in promises. She was a mother, a warrior, but she was also a woman. And deep down, a part of her wanted to believe that the remorseful man was sincere. Not out of need, but because she felt that denying that love could become another form of prison. The doubt wasn't just about forgiving. It was about allowing herself to love again without betraying her own pain. Paige knew that forgiveness is an act of courage, and she had already been courageous for too long. But maybe now, it was time to be generous too. With him, with herself, with the story that could still be written. That night, before sleeping, she opened her journal and wrote something she had never dared to put into words before. "If I ever love again, I want to do it with my eyes open and my soul at peace." It was on a cold Thursday morning when Paige realized something wasn't right. Rose, always so quiet and observant, had a fever, her skin pale and her eyes dull. She tried to bring her fever down with cold compresses and home remedies, but nothing worked. When the little girl began to hallucinate, saying she saw stars falling from the ceiling, Paige rushed to the hospital. In the pediatric emergency room, everything happened very quickly. The doctor diagnosed an acute infection and ordered urgent tests. The situation was delicate. Rose needed a blood transfusion, and urgently. Paige, desperate, offered immediately, but her blood type was not compatible. She called friends, neighbors, anyone. No one was O negative. It was then that Arthur appeared. Every day, he would discreetly ask the neighbors about the girls. Upon learning what was happening, he rushed to the hospital. When the receptionist asked if he was a family member, he hesitated for a second and told the truth. "I'm the father." The doctor, pressed for time, just nodded. Arthur was tested, and it was confirmed. He was a match. He was taken to the donation room. And during the long minutes, his blood flowed to save the daughter he had never been able to hold. Arthur cried in silence. Not out of fear, but out of redemption. Rose survived. The next day, though weak, she opened her eyes and whispered, "Where's Uncle Andrew?" Paige smiled sadly, holding her hand. "He's here, but he's not your uncle." And with a lump in her throat, she told the three of them the truth. Violet was silent. Lily made a face of surprise. Rose just blinked slowly. "So, he's our real daddy?" Paige nodded, her eyes full of tears. She didn't know how they would react, but the girls, with their pure hearts, just asked to see him. Arthur entered the room and was greeted by 3 pairs of curious and excited eyes. He knelt beside the bed and whispered, "My name is Arthur, and I'm the most foolish man in the world for having missed 5 years of you." The girls didn't say anything. They just came closer and hugged him at the same time, as if they had been waiting for him all along. Paige, watching from a distance, felt an earthquake inside her. It was beautiful. It was moving, but it was also confusing. This changed everything. That night, sitting alone on the hospital terrace, Paige felt torn between the fear of being hurt again and the hope of seeing her daughters grow up with a real father. For the first time, she didn't know what to do. She was facing the biggest dilemma of her life. And then, as if the universe wanted to tell her something, she saw Arthur leave the hospital with swollen eyes, but a serene face. He looked at her with humility, without promises, without a rush, just with his presence. And that, perhaps, was the first step. The days that followed Rose's recovery were different. Paige noticed a new kind of presence in Arthur. He didn't force anything. He didn't demand space. He didn't ask for answers. He was simply there. He would bring fruits, help with simple tasks, tell stories to the girls, and most importantly, he would listen. With attention, with patience. It was a Sunday afternoon when he came with an invitation. "I want to take you all somewhere, just for a walk. No pressure." Paige hesitated, but seeing her daughters jumping with excitement, she ended up accepting. Maybe it was time to see how far he was willing to go, not with words, but with actions. The destination was a field of flowers on the outskirts of the town, a hidden, silent place where the sound of the wind and the scent of lavender mixed together. Arthur prepared a simple picnic with fruits, juices, and the girls' favorite sandwiches, which he had discovered by discreetly asking Paige's neighbor. The triplets ran free among the flowers, while Paige and Arthur watched them from a distance. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was laden with memories, yes, but there was also a contained tenderness, a respect that grew with every simple gesture. "Did you do all this for them?" Paige asked as she ate a piece of mango. "For them and for you," he replied. "Because despite everything, I never stopped loving you." She looked away, trying to hide the lump in her throat. It wasn't easy. Forgiving isn't forgetting, but there was something there that she couldn't deny. He had changed, less arrogant, more present, more human. The hours passed like soft clouds. Lily lay on Arthur's lap. Violet fell asleep in her mother's arms, and Rose drew hearts in the sand with a stick. It was as if time wanted to stop there, to eternalize that instant of peace. When the sun began to set, Paige moved away a little. She sat on a rock and looked at the horizon. Arthur went to her, but said nothing. He just stood there, by her side, letting the silence speak. And then she whispered, "I hated you for a long time, but seeing you with them makes me remember the man I fell in love with." He didn't answer. He just took her hand, delicately, like someone holding something fragile and valuable. Paige didn't pull away. And in that touch, without noise, without grandiose promises, something new was born. A new beginning, a hope. And when the girls ran toward them, with flowers in their hands and smiles on their faces, Paige understood. Maybe true love doesn't die. Maybe it just hides until it finds the courage to return. The triplets' 5th birthday was approaching, and Paige, as always, was planning something simple. A homemade cake, colorful balloons, and cheerful music in the backyard. There wasn't much money, but there was plenty of love. What she didn't know was that Arthur had other plans. And this time, with the silent help of his mother, Mrs. Teresa, he was preparing something none of them would ever forget. On the day of the birthday, Paige was surprised by a different invitation. "Just get ready today. The rest is on me." She wanted to protest, but seeing the girl's excitement and the shine in Arthur's eyes, something inside her relaxed. Maybe it was time to let herself be cared for. Arthur rented a rustic space on the outskirts of the town, an old manor with flowering gardens, lights hung in the trees, wooden tables, and handmade decorations. Everything was simple, but with a delicate taste, planned with every detail in mind. Each flower was a favorite color of one of the girls. Each candy held a memory. The triplets arrived with their eyes blindfolded, and when they took off the blindfolds, they screamed in unison. There were friends from school, neighbors, and a small band playing children's songs. Paige, seeing all of this, felt her eyes fill with tears. Not because of the luxury, but because of the care, the intention, the real presence. During the party, Arthur was the perfect host. He played with the girls, served food, took photos, and all the while, he looked at Paige with that gaze of a man who knows how much he failed and how much he wants to do things right now. When the sun began to set, the band played a soft melody. Arthur asked for everyone's attention. With a trembling voice, he said, "5 years ago, I let go of the greatest gift life ever gave me. Today, if you'll allow me, I want to make a promise I should have made a long time ago." The people were silent. Paige, confused, felt her heart pound. It was then that Arthur took a small blue velvet box from his pocket. He opened it in front of everyone and revealed an old but carefully preserved ring. "I bought this ring before you told me you were pregnant. I was going to ask you to be my wife, but I was a coward. I kept it all this time, not because I expected your forgiveness, but because I never stopped loving you." The triplets looked at each other and screamed, "Mommy, say yes!" Paige moved, put her hands to her face. The party vanished around her. All she saw was Arthur, on his knees, not as the millionaire who had once left her, but as the man who was fighting to become worthy of that love. She took a deep breath. The pain of the past was still there, but now there was something bigger: gratitude. For him having come back. For him having stayed. For him having learned. And then, With tears in her eyes and a smile that said more than 1,000 words, she held out her hand. "Yes, Arthur, but this time, let it be forever." The wedding day dawned with a clear sky and a gentle breeze, as if the universe knew that, after so much pain and struggle, it was time to celebrate. Paige woke up before the girls and spent a few minutes watching them sleep. The three of them, with their hair spread out on the pillow, looked like dreams turned into people. She smiled, and she cried, with joy. The place Arthur chose could be no other. The park where everything began again. The same place where he first saw the triplets, where Paige confronted him with her gaze, where the silence between them said it all. Now, flowers adorned the trees, candles hung in small jars, and the wooden benches were decorated with colorful ribbons made by the girls themselves. Paige walked toward the simple altar on the arm of Violet, Rose, and Lily, her little maids of honor. She wore a modest white dress, but one made with love by a seamstress neighbor. She didn't need luxury. She was beauty itself, strong, serene, complete. Arthur was waiting for her, his eyes filled with tears. He was wearing the same suit from the 5th birthday party, the same contained smile, the same gaze, but now without fear. Behind him, Mrs. Teresa watched with emotion. The old matriarch now saw the man she had always dreamed her son would become. When Paige arrived at the altar, Arthur took her hand delicately. The justice of the peace began the ceremony, but everything around them seemed to vanish. Only the two of them existed. Their gazes were fixed, their hands firm, their hearts saying yes long before the words did. And then, before any vows, Paige spoke. "Some loves don't die, Arthur. They just hide behind the pain. I hated you, yes, but I also waited for you, even though I didn't know I was waiting." She paused, took a deep breath, and with tears in her eyes, completed. "I forgive you. Not once, not twice. I would forgive you 1,000 times, if, at the end of it all, it was you who came back." Arthur, now crying openly, replied with a trembling voice, "And I would come back 1,000 times more, just to see you say you forgive me." The kiss was soft, like a new beginning. The daughters applauded, laughing. The guests smiled with moist eyes. The past finally rested, and the future was born there, hand in hand, with a love that had survived everything. That afternoon, as they danced to the sound of a lone guitar under the golden light of the sunset, Paige rested her head on Arthur's shoulder and whispered, "Now there are 5 of us, and nothing else matters." We invite you to leave your opinion on this incredible story in the comments. If you liked it, share it, and subscribe to the channel to support our work. Another story is appearing on your screen, which will probably also move you. Don't miss it.